December the 16th, 1944. Dawn's first light broke over Mona, Germany, the frigid earth quaking as another barrage of American artillery thundered overhead. Yet, a disquieting alteration pervaded the morning's chaos, a terrifying, unfathomable difference. The projectiles were not impacting the soil or the trees. Instead, they were exploding in midair, directly above the advancing German formations, unleashing a deadly tempest of shrapnel against which no foxhole offered succor. Among the ranks of the 326th Volk Grenadier Division, pressing their assault against the positions of the 38th Cavalry Squadron, soldiers who had endured years of harrowing combat on the Eastern Front confronted a phenomenon that shattered their understanding of warfare. These were not the familiar artillery patterns, the predictable impacts, the discernible safe zones, nor the protective sanctuary of entrenched positions. This was death delivered from the heavens with an unnerving mathematical exactitude. At that precise juncture, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group had just enacted one of the most pivotal unauthorized maneuvers of the Battle of the Bulge. Disregarding explicit directives and without any authorization from superior command, he had commanded his gun crews to load shells armed with the most fiercely guarded secret within the Allied arsenal, proximity fuses. These ingenious devices, incorporating miniature radar systems capable of gauging distance to targets and initiating detonation at an optimal altitude, were poised to amplify artillery's lethal capacity by a staggering factor of 50. The very calculus of destruction was about to be recalibrated amidst the frozen woodlands of the Ardennes. What the German soldiers could not possibly comprehend was that they had just encountered a weapon so groundbreaking it would irrevocably reshape not only this singular engagement, but the fundamental essence of armed conflict itself. The tempest had been unleashed. Operation Watch on the Rhine had commenced with formidable promise for the Wehrmacht. Hitler's final audacious gambit involved 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, all concealed through clandestine means amidst the fog-draped Ardennes. The Führer had assured his generals that this offensive would cleave the Allied armies asunder, recapture Antwerp, and thus reverse the inexorable slide toward defeat that plagued the war effort. The initial bombardment, initiated at 5:30 in the morning on December 16th, had achieved complete tactical surprise. German artillery unleashed a torrent of 1,600 rounds per minute across an 85-mile front. American intelligence had faltered spectacularly. The massive troop buildup had gone undetected, and numerous frontline units consisted of either untested recruits or battle-weary veterans relegated to this quiescent sector for recuperation. However, at Monshaw, Colonel Axelson found himself confronting an insurmountable tactical predicament. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a relatively small reconnaissance element, was being overwhelmed by superior German forces. Conventional artillery proved utterly incapable of halting the assault. In a moment of desperate resolve, Axelson made his historic decision to deploy the secret proximity fuse shells without authorization. He understood that he would likely face a court-martial for this choice, but in that critical instant, he recognized that adherence to orders would guarantee certain defeat. The impact was immediate and utterly devastating. German soldiers advancing in traditional assault formations suddenly found themselves subjected to a type of ordnance they had never before encountered. The shells detonated 30 to 50 feet above their heads. Each explosion generated a cone of lethal fragments that encompassed a far broader area than conventional ground-burst shells. Veterans who had mastered the art of taking cover from standard artillery found themselves cut down within their foxholes, behind trees, or in ditches, wherever they sought refuge. The arcane science of annihilation. The proximity fuse represented the apex of American scientific ingenuity and industrial might converging. Unlike conventional shells, which necessitated direct impact or timed fuses prone to erroneous detonation altitudes, the proximity fuse housed a self-contained radar system no larger than a coffee can. Within each fuse, American engineers had meticulously integrated 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 minuscule vacuum tubes, depending on the specific model, all engineered to withstand the astonishing 20,000 times gravitational force experienced during artillery launch. The underlying physics were nothing short of staggering. At the moment of firing, the immense acceleration would rupture a glass ampule containing an electrolyte, thereby activating a battery that powered the diminutive radar for the shell's entire flight trajectory. Dr. Merle Tuve at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory had spearheaded this development with a fervor akin to the Manhattan Project. The laboratory, ingeniously disguised as a disused car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed 3% of all American physicists during its peak operational period. Security protocols paralleled those of the atomic bomb program. Workers were forbidden from discussing their endeavors, even with their families, and each fuse bore a unique serial number for meticulous tracking. The technical hurdles had initially appeared insurmountable. Vacuum tubes designed for household radios required a complete redesign to endure the rigmarole of being fired from cannons. They had to function while spinning at extreme rotational velocities, operate reliably in all climatic conditions, and possess sufficient sensitivity to detect targets without premature detonation. The pivotal breakthrough was achieved through miniaturization techniques that would later revolutionize the entire electronics industry. Dr. James Van Allen's vacuum tubes were no larger than pencil erasers, yet they contained all the essential elements of conventional radio tubes. By December of 1944, American factories were producing an astounding 40,000 proximity fuses daily. Over 100 corporations, including titans like RCA, General Electric, Sylvania, and Crosley Corporation, contributed to this colossal effort. The program's expenditure reached $1 billion in 1940s currency, making it second only to the Manhattan Project in terms of wartime investment, authorization crisis, and expansion. Axelson's unsanctioned deployment on December 16th precipitated an immediate command crisis. He had flagrantly violated explicit orders that restricted the use of proximity fuses to anti-aircraft applications, a measure taken out of concern that captured examples might be reverse-engineered by the Germans. However, the devastating efficacy observed at Mona was undeniable. The German advance had been abruptly halted, inflicting casualties that shocked both sides. News of the weapon's impact rapidly ascended to Supreme Headquarters. General Eisenhower, recognizing the dire situation unfolding across the Ardennes, formally sought authorization on December 19th. By December 21st, all restrictions were rescinded, and proximity fuses were sanctioned for general ground combat deployment throughout the entirety of the Bulge battlefield. The swift distribution that ensued underscored American logistical superiority. Within days, shells equipped with proximity fuses were being delivered to artillery units across the Ardennes. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, stationed at Bastogne, received their allocation precisely as the German noose tightened around the town. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, operating their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began utilizing them to safeguard the northwestern approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, employed them with devastating effect southwest of Bastogne. Each unit arrived at the same profound realization. Proximity fuses had transformed artillery from a mere supporting weapon into a decisive instrument of battlefield victory. Forward observers no longer needed to painstakingly adjust their fire. The fuses themselves would determine the optimal detonation point. Accuracy requirements diminished, while lethality escalated exponentially. Bastogne, surrounded but triumphant. The siege of Bastogne served as a perfect illustration of proximity fuses' potential in defensive warfare. The 101st Airborne Division, completely encircled and heavily outnumbered, valiantly defended the crucial crossroads against relentless German assaults. Their artillery support included the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 75mm pack howitzers capable of firing proximity fuse shells. Between December 19th and the 31st, the 463rd expended precisely 7,676 rounds, according to official unit records. While not all of these were proximity fused due to supply limitations, those that were delivered a devastating psychological and physical blow. German assault formations simply dissolved under the relentless airburst barrages, with entire platoons annihilated in mere seconds. The assault on December 22nd, occurring shortly after General McAuliffe's famously defiant "nuts" reply to the German surrender demand, starkly demonstrated the weapon's potency. German infantry advancing across snow-covered fields in traditional formations found themselves exposed. The proximity-fused shells detonated overhead with uncanny precision, creating overlapping patterns of destruction that left no sanctuary. The all-African American 969th Artillery Battalion played an equally crucial role. Their 155mm howitzers established a ring of death around Bastonia's perimeter, a cordon that German forces found utterly impenetrable. The larger shells, detonating at 50 feet, blanketed even greater expanses with lethal fragments. German prisoners later recounted that attacking units frequently lost their cohesion before even reaching American lines, with soldiers fleeing in terror from the incomprehensible aerial detonations. The Sour River Slaughter. Arguably the most meticulously documented instance of proximity-fused lethality occurred at the Sour River near Etterbeek on December 25th to 26th. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was driving northward to relieve Bastonia, personally witnessed this engagement and recorded it in his memoir, War as I Knew It. A German battalion attempting to cross the partially frozen river believed they were shielded from American observation by the darkness and fog. Conventional artillery would have necessitated painstaking adjustments to fire, affording the Germans time to complete their crossing or seek cover. Proximity-fused shells, however, required no such deliberate calibration. Patton recounted, "We caught a German battalion crossing the Sour. The new posit ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. This figure, 702, killed by actual count, represents one of the exceedingly few precisely documented casualty figures resulting from proximity-fused deployment. The mathematical efficiency was stark. A single battalion effectively ceased to exist within minutes, with no possibility of escape or defense. The psychological impact rippled throughout German units in the sector, with soldiers refusing orders to conduct river crossings. Forest warfare revolutionized. The dense forests of the Ardennes, which the Germans had counted upon for concealment, transformed into lethal traps once proximity fuses entered the tactical equation. In open terrain, a proximity fuse detonating at 30 to 50 feet was sufficiently deadly. However, within forests, the effects multiplied exponentially. The air bursts shattered tree branches, transforming them into thousands of additional wooden projectiles. These splinters, some as long as a man's arm, traveled at hundreds of feet per second, inflicting lethal damage. Traditional defensive positions, such as seeking cover behind large trees or digging foxholes beneath root systems, became utterly useless. The fragments and splinters descended from above, rendering centuries of tactical wisdom regarding forest combat obsolete. American artillery units quickly grasped this amplified effect. A single proximity-fused 155mm shell detonating above the forest canopy could obliterate an area the size of a tennis court, eradicating all life within it. The combination of metal fragments from the shell and wooden splinters from the trees created a 360-degree kill zone from which no amount of tactical skill could provide evasion. German units trained in forest warfare found their expertise rendered worthless. Spreading out to avoid concentrated casualties rendered units vulnerable to the wide area effects. Bunching together for mutual support meant entire squads could be annihilated by single shells. There existed no viable tactical countermeasure to this novel threat. Technical supremacy in action. The proximity fuse operated on principles that seemed akin to science fiction to soldiers of the 1940s. Each fuse contained a minute radio transmitter operating within the 180 to 220 MHz range, continuously emitting waves that reflected off objects, the ground, trees, vehicles, and human bodies. As the shell approached its target, the reflected signal intensified. When it reached a predetermined intensity corresponding to the optimal burst altitude, an electronic switch triggered detonation. The entire system was engineered to function under conditions that would obliterate conventional electronics. During firing, the acceleration reached 20,000 times Earth's gravity, sufficient to crush a human body to microscopic thinness. The shells spun at speeds that generated immense centrifugal forces. Temperatures fluctuated from the 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit of the gun barrel to sub-zero conditions at the trajectory's apex. Yet, the delicate vacuum tubes, shielded by innovative cushioning systems, survived and performed with an impressive reliability rate exceeding 80%. The optimal burst altitudes had been meticulously determined through extensive testing at the Aberdeen Proving Ground for 105mm howitzers. The standard divisional artillery piece, 30 feet, proved ideal. The 155mm guns achieved maximum lethality at 50 feet. The rare 240mm shells delivered devastating effects at over 70 feet, capable of clearing entire grid squares of enemy forces. This technological ascendancy directly translated into battlefield dominance. Studies indicated that proximity fuses increased lethality by 5 to 10 times compared to conventional shells. The lethal fragment area expanded by a factor of 50. Anti-aircraft applications demonstrated even more dramatic improvements. The success rate for shooting down V-1 flying bombs surged from 17% to 79% within mere weeks of proximity fuse deployment. Intelligence failures and German confusion. The catastrophic failure of German intelligence regarding proximity fuses proved to be a pivotal setback. In December of 1944, Wehrmacht forces overran an American ammunition depot, capturing approximately 20,000 proximity fuse shells. This intelligence windfall should have spurred immediate development of countermeasures. Instead, German technical experts examined the captured fuses and summarily declared them impossible to function. The presence of vacuum tubes within an artillery shell contradicted every tenet of German engineering concerning electronics and ballistics. They concluded that the Americans were employing some form of magnetic detection, or that the visible components were mere decoys concealing the true mechanism. This critical failure stemmed, in part, from institutional complacency. Germany had, in fact, pioneered proximity fuse development prior to the war. Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin had functional prototypes by 1940. However, Hitler's directive mandating the cancellation of all weapons projects requiring more than 6 months for production had abruptly terminated the program. German engineers could not fathom that the Americans had successfully surmounted challenges they themselves had abandoned. The irony intensified when considering Germany's own technological prowess. Their electrostatic proximity fuses exhibited a 95% reliability rate in tests, utilizing changes in electrical capacitance rather than radar. Had development continued, Germany might have fielded proximity fuses as early as 1941. Hermann Göring would later admit during interrogation that German fuses were merely 3 or 4 months from production when the war concluded. The Christmas catastrophe, December 25, 1944, offered no respite from the holiday spirit. German units attempting to leverage the Christmas period for resupply and reorganization discovered that proximity fuses recognized no ceasefires. Field kitchens, supply convoys, and assembly areas became subjected to devastating bombardments that required no forward observers. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone expended over 1,000 rounds on Christmas Day, the majority equipped with proximity fuses. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers delivered rapid, precise fire that caught German units entirely unprepared. The capacity to engage effectively without direct observation, even in inclement weather or darkness, transformed artillery from a daylight-dependent weapon into a 24-hour threat. The psychological toll was severe. German soldiers had learned to maneuver during periods of poor weather when Allied aircraft were grounded and observers were incapacitated. Proximity fuses effectively eliminated this sanctuary. Death could descend at any moment, in any weather, with no warning beyond the brief chilling whistle of incoming shells, Malmedy and Skorzany's elite. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Skorzany's elite commandos attempted to seize Malmedy. These were not ordinary soldiers, but specially selected troops who had orchestrated Mussolini's rescue, nearly captured Tito, and infiltrated American lines disguised in U.S. uniforms. They represented the pinnacle of German military capability. they encountered devastating proximity-fused artillery fire that rendered their American disguises not an advantage, but a death shroud. The shells detonated overhead with an uncanny precision, as if they could unerringly detect the impostors below. While exact casualty figures remain a subject of debate, the assault failed spectacularly, resulting in heavy losses that effectively concluded Skorzeny's offensive operations. The psychological disintegration among the elite SS troops proved particularly significant. These soldiers, indoctrinated with notions of German superiority and trained to the highest standards, found themselves utterly helpless against American technological advancement. Some survivors reportedly charged directly toward American lines, embracing a swift demise over continued bombardment, signifying a complete breakdown of military discipline among Hitler's most fanatical soldiers. Industrial achievement. The production miracle behind the proximity fuse rivaled any other wartime industrial accomplishment. By December of 1944, over 100 American companies had transitioned their manufacturing capabilities to fuse production. The Crosley Corporation abandoned refrigerator manufacturing to focus on fuse assembly. Emerson Radio retooled from producing home electronics to weapons manufacturing. Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric dedicated entire facilities to the program. Quality control surpassed any benchmarks previously established in mass production. Each of the 130 components underwent individual rigorous testing. Every solder joint was meticulously inspected under magnification. Random samples were subjected to actual firing tests to verify their resilience under combat conditions. The rejection rate was unforgiving. Any component exhibiting even the slightest deviation was immediately discarded. The workforce, predominantly comprised of women, maintained this exacting precision while laboring 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. Due to stringent security compartmentalization, they remained unaware of the specific nature of their production. Their sole understanding was that their work was vital to the war effort. By December of 1944, they were manufacturing one proximity fuse every 2 seconds, operating around the clock. The cost reduction achieved was remarkable. In 1942, each fuse cost $732, exceeding a worker's annual salary. By December of 1944, mass production had driven costs down to $18 per unit, while concurrently upholding superior quality. This remarkable efficiency facilitated the production of 22 million fuses during the war, with 200,000 deployed solely during the Battle of the Bulge. Patton's arithmetic. General Patton possessed an unparalleled understanding of the proximity fuse's value, perhaps exceeding that of any other commander. His Third Army, spearheading the drive to relieve Bastogne, employed them as a decisive breakthrough weapon. His artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, devised novel tactics specifically tailored for proximity fuse deployment. Williams pioneered the concept of time-on-target concentration, utilizing proximity fuses, where multiple battalions fired in unison, ensuring their shells arrived simultaneously. When dozens of proximity fuse shells detonated concurrently at their optimal altitudes, the effect was apocalyptic. German soldiers grimly referred to it as the bell toll of death. In the week spanning December 22nd to the 29th, Patton's Third Army expended 50,000 proximity-fused shells. The results proved decisive in shattering German resistance and creating the crucial corridor to Bastogne. Patton himself famously remarked, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us." Elsenborn Ridge. The battle for Elsenborn Ridge showcased proximity fuses at their maximum effectiveness. Here, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held critical terrain against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Over a 3-day period, from December 17th to the 19th, American artillery unleashed 160,000 rounds, with approximately 40,000 of these being proximity fused. These 25% of the shells accounted for an estimated 60% of the over 5,000 German casualties. The mathematics were undeniable. Proximity fuses amplified American firepower by a factor of 4. The German assaults, launched repeatedly up the steep, wooded inclines, were met by volleys of air-bursting steel. Entire companies vanished in mere seconds. their fallen comrades forming piles so dense that subsequent waves were forced to traverse the bodies of their own dead. After 3 days, the assaults faltered. The elite of the Waffen-SS had been utterly broken by American ingenuity. Operation Bodenplatter's demise. On the first day of January, 1945, the Luftwaffe initiated Operation Bodenplatter, deploying 900 fighter aircraft to target Allied air bases. The surprise was absolute, catching a significant number of Allied planes on the ground. However, as the returning German aviators approached their targets, they encountered a barrage of anti-aircraft fire, employing proximity fuses. Of the 277 German aircraft lost that day, 172 were downed by anti-aircraft artillery, the majority of which were equipped with proximity fuses. The effectiveness of this weaponry astonished both sides. German pilots trained to anticipate and evade conventional predictive anti-aircraft barrages found themselves facing shells that detonated precisely at the optimal altitude to inflict maximum destruction. The Luftwaffe, already severely weakened, never truly recovered from these catastrophic losses, shattering the veil of secrecy. By the beginning of January 1945, maintaining the secrecy surrounding this new ordnance became an insurmountable challenge. An excessive quantity of shells had been expended, and too many soldiers had directly witnessed their devastating effects. Consequently, on January 6th, the War Department granted authorization for a restricted disclosure. The New York Times published an account of a novel artillery projectile that amplified the efficacy of American weaponry, without delving into the underlying technological specifics. German intelligence eventually comprehended the significance of this weapon, but far too late. A report dated January 10th from Foreign Armies West stated, "The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse capable of detonating shells at an ideal height for maximum anti-personnel impact. This ordnance has inflicted severe casualties among our troops in the Ardennes. No viable countermeasures are currently available. Strategic impact assessment. Post-war analyses conclusively demonstrated the decisive impact of the proximity fuse." Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt remarked, "The proximity fuse was the deciding factor. Our offensives faltered not due to the valor of the American soldiers, though they fought commendably, but because of artillery that appeared to possess its own discernment." General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, testified, "The American artillery was the bane of our soldiers, particularly the new shells that burst in mid-air. They induce panic even among seasoned veterans. The statistics paint a clear picture. 200,000 shells employing proximity fuses were discharged, accounting for an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 German casualties, representing up to 20% of the total German losses. This weapon achieved 5 to 10 times greater lethality than conventional munitions, while also negating the need for forward observation in adverse weather conditions." The human toll. Behind every statistical figure lay a profound human tragedy. German soldiers, many of them mere teenagers conscripted in the war's final throes, perished in ways previously unimaginable in traditional warfare. They were struck down by weapons that seemed imbued with an almost sentient quality, capable of locating them no matter their hiding place. American industrial workers also paid a steep price. Factory accidents were frequently concealed for security reasons. Workers at Crosley Corporation, Emerson Radio, and other facilities suffered mental and physical breakdowns stemming from stress and exhaustion. They manufactured instruments of unprecedented destructive power without any understanding of their ultimate purpose, bearing this burden in enforced silence. Yet, the ethical calculus of war is rarely straightforward. The Battle of the Bulge alone resulted in 19,000 American fatalities. Without the advantage of proximity fuses, how many more would have perished? How much longer would the conflict have dragged on? How many additional Holocaust victims would have succumbed while battles raged? Each day the war was shortened, potentially saved thousands held in concentration camps, awaiting liberation. Technological legacy. The development of the proximity fuse program spurred advancements that fundamentally reshaped post-war technology. The miniaturized vacuum tubes that were integral to its design became the foundational elements of modern electronics. The stringent quality control procedures established for fuse production were subsequently adopted as industry benchmarks. The sophisticated organizational methods employed to coordinate hundreds of disparate suppliers pioneered the principles of modern supply chain management. Dr. James Van Allen, applying his expertise in miniaturization, later utilized these innovations in satellite instrumentation, leading to his discovery of Earth's radiation belts. The radar principles refined during this era evolved into contemporary radar systems. The concept of autonomous sensors, making independent decisions, laid the groundwork for guided missiles, and ultimately, all forms of smart weaponry. Every precision-guided munition employed today can trace its lineage back to the proximity fuse, the inaugural weapon capable of sensing its surroundings and determining its own detonation time. The revolution initiated in the Ardennes continues to this day on modern battlefields, where intelligent munitions have become the dominant force in warfare. Final reckoning. The Battle of the Bulge concluded on January 25, 1945, with German forces in full retreat. Hitler's final offensive had exacted a toll of approximately 100,000 casualties from Germany, achieving no strategic gains. American losses amounted to 75,000, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse had unequivocally proven itself not merely as a formidable weapon, but as a decisive factor in winning the war. General Eisenhower's assessment, suggesting that German possession of proximity fuses might have rendered D-Day exceedingly challenging, perhaps even impossible, powerfully underscores their profound strategic significance. They represented not simply an incremental improvement in artillery capabilities, but a revolutionary technological leap that fundamentally altered the mathematical equations of warfare. The German soldiers who confronted proximity-fused artillery experienced something entirely unprecedented. Death delivered by projectiles that seemed imbued with an uncanny intelligence, capable of finding them wherever they sought refuge, transforming the very atmosphere into a zone of lethal danger. Their experience marked the definitive transition of warfare into the technological era. From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized initial deployment on December 16, 1944, through the systematic use of 200,000 shells across the Ardennes, proximity fuses demonstrated that scientific innovation could provide a decisive military advantage. The confluence of American industrial might, scientific brilliance, and tactical adaptability produced a weapon that played a crucial role in determining the war's ultimate outcome. The narrative of the proximity fuse is, at its core, a story of transformation, technological, tactical, and human. It proved that an industrial democracy could engineer weapons of immense destructive capability, that innovation could surmount numerical disadvantages, and that the nation possessing superior scientific acumen was likely to emerge victorious. These lessons not only shaped the remainder of World War II, but also fundamentally influenced the entire structure of warfare that followed. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the age of technologically advanced warfare truly dawned. The calculations of mortality were irrevocably altered by minute radar sets housed within artillery shells, forever changing the human methods of waging war. The German soldiers who perished beneath the aerial explosions of proximity-fused munitions were casualties not solely of a specific engagement, but of a profound revolution in military affairs whose influence continues to shape our world today.